Welcome back, everybody. Super excited for today's episode. But before I get into that, let's talk about what makes this whole thing possible. If you've listened to the podcast before, you know that is Black Rifle Coffee. Let's head over to their website right now. The first thing you're going to see, if you head over to blackriflecoffee.com, they usually have a rotating banner, but it appears that they have only one thing on it right now, and that is joining their coffee club subscription. If you use the code COFFEE20, you're going to get 20% off when you start the subscription. And the cool thing about this, I'm actually a member of this, is you can pick whatever roast you want, deliver it where you want, or have it delivered on the frequency that you want it to. And if you go down a little bit on their website, because maybe you're not familiar with their roasts, there is a sliding bar that goes from the lightest, which looks like their silencer smooth, to the darkest, which appears to be their murdered out roast, the extra dark, and everything, of course, in between. And we made it through the holiday season, so I hope that everybody was able to gift their favorite coffee lover something to drink it in, maybe a cooler way to make their coffee in, a piece of apparel, whatever it may be. And if you didn't, there's always the apparel, the gear, the bundles, which is a cool way to expose people to the brand, as well as the sampler. And then the bottom, it used to be there and it's gone now, but it was their best sellers, which actually now is up top on the rotating, or not the rotating, but the header. You know why things are different? They just redid their website. I remember this. So head on over to blackriflecoffee.com and surf to your heart's delight. And the best way to support the podcast is to support those that help make this possible and allow me to bring it to you. And that's it on the business side of the house for today. My guest today is my absolute favorite person on the face of the planet Earth. It is my wife, Leah Stumpf. And there are so many things that I love about her. And there is no way to unpack probably most, if probably any of them on an episode like this. And I wanted her to come on so people can get a better understanding of who she is and what she's been able to accomplish in her life, whether that's her journey through academics, her working in Alaska as a kayak ranger, school teacher in Portland, a jiu-jitsu athlete and competitor, all the way to the point of winning worlds at blue belt. She podiumed at purple, and I don't want to misspeak because the last thing I want to do is represent her as something that is inaccurate. Multiple-time Masters, world champion as well, coach, currently here in Kalispell, not only of an evening adult class, but an anchor in the children's program as well. And beyond all those things, she makes me want to be a better person. She makes me want to work harder. She helped me dig out of the darkest moments of my life. And I love her to death. And I hope you enjoy the episode. Episode 319 with Leah Stumpf. Enjoy.
Okay, got the red smoke. Gun run, north or south, west of the smoke, west of the smoke. Okay, copy, west of the smoke. I'm looking at danger close now. Come on with it, baby, give it to me, I need it. Get cleared hot. Copy, cleared hot.
Why do today what can be put off until tomorrow? I think I heard David Goggins say that.
These are the real gems, huh? The pre-podcast.
Oh, no, we're already going.
No.
That's the beauty, is we start whenever we want to.
No.
I want to get to the jiu-jitsu stuff, but
yeah.
I personally, one of the things that I love very much about you is the diversity in your background and kind of how you got to jiu-jitsu.
Mm-hmm. I do feel like I've told that story many times, but I think most people don't all listen to the same podcast. So, you know.
I mean, we don't have to spend like hours talking about it, but I think it helps with the context of who you are as a person. If we talk a little bit about kind of where you grew up, and I mean, you did a lot before you found your way into jiu-jitsu. Karate, maybe a little Aikido, both Michael's favorites, obviously. Mm-hmm. Michael, did you know she's a karate black belt?
I did know that, actually, yeah.
It's very dangerous, yeah.
You are as a karate black belt, or just being a karate black belt is very dangerous?
Both.
Okay. Unless they try to hit you twice, right?
Yeah, that's where it falls apart.
Yeah. Give people the wave tops of where you're from.
Well, when are we starting?
We're already going.
No.
We're going right now.
We need like an official start.
That's not how it works here.
How do you...
The official start was like 3 minutes and 9 seconds ago.
Yeah.
No, we can't put all that in there. It wasn't good.
We won't put all of it in there.
It needs to be a little more professional. How do
Okay,
you
good.
How do you normally start?
We just talk.
We do west of the smoke, west of the smoke.
No, that's added afterwards.
Yeah.
I mean, I guess we could have Michael play that if you want, but
No,
could.
that's okay.
I think it's always just best to just go into the conversation.
All right, go ahead.
We already did.
What's
You're
your-
being resistant.
What's
as a
your
guest.
first question?
I want you to. I know where you're from, and about your upbringing and kind of what. I mean, we're in Montana right now, which is very far from where you were born and raised. Fill us in on how you went from one place and the things you did in between the two,
Okay.
which is an incredibly broad question, obviously.
Yes. Just tell your life story.
Yes, that's what I meant.
Okay. I grew up in central New York, Rome, New York to be exact, and did a lot of snowboarding there at the tiny little mountain called Woods Valley. Shout
Which
out
you've
to
taken
Woods
me to.
Valley. Yeah, it's amazing.
It's known for its powder.
It has a cornfield at the top. Spent a lot of time there, and I started teaching lessons there. Both my mom and dad were teachers, so kind of grew up around other instructors, and I really enjoyed teaching snowboarding. I loved snowboarding so much. I liked teaching it. So I kind of fell in love with teaching, ended up going to school for science and doing outdoor education for a while. I continued teaching snowboard lessons, and my mom put me in karate in high school for self-defense purposes, and I did get my black belt in college at a karate program, and I met some really wonderful people there, and it gave me a way to keep in shape and a team, but I did not feel like I could fight at the end of it. We did a kind of a little self-defense test, and I've told this story before, but we had kind of a big hard block that we would do for punches, and someone would throw one punch, and then we'd kind of do a bunch of karate stuff, and they would freeze in place and kind of let you work. And you did get good at blocking that first punch, but one of the people threw two punches, punched me right in the face, and I did my test the next day with a black eye, but I realized that I could not defend myself very well.
For clarity, this man knew that he was only supposed to throw one punch, correct?
No, at that point you could. So you could throw, at that point in the test, you didn't know what they were going to throw. Okay. And most people did kind of one, or they would throw one, and then like there was a hesitation between the second one, or they throw a kick, or they could have a weapon, quote unquote, which would be like a rolled up newspaper, or a chain or something, or you do chair defense. There was just...
No, you didn't.
It was, yeah. They
Seriously?
made it
chair
as,
defense?
Yeah. They made it as... It was a blended style, and they incorporated some throwing and some kickboxing. So the idea wasn't bad. The art, the concept was a little more live than a lot of traditional martial arts styles. The sparring looked more like kickboxing, and when it became more live, it kind of fell apart a little bit. And I felt that at the time. I wanted to do it to compete still. I'd been a gymnast, and I liked the performance part of it. If you do katas, which are kind of a routine where you're fighting an invisible person in a competition, and you can do flips and kick high, you do pretty well in those competitions. And so I was having fun with it. And I met some really great people, some good friends in school and instructors. And it gave me a peer group and something to focus on. But I was, after that, looking for something more. And so as I traveled around, I was working for the Forest Service. And
how'd you get into that? You mentioned outdoor education. What does that mean?
So science, you're teaching science in an outdoor setting in general, environmental education. And I went to school in Syracuse for that at ESF. It's an environmental and science and forestry school. And so there's a graduate program there that's environmental interpretation, essentially, for education purposes, and you learn how to incorporate context into the science, which ties people to the land. And if they're tied to a place, if they understand it, they're more likely to want to preserve it and come back. And so it's a conservation effort in a roundabout way, education. And I really loved it. I had some amazing jobs with the Forest Service. I was a sea kayak ranger for a little bit. I got to do some education programs in classrooms. I worked for the Audubon Society for a little bit. and eventually made my way into classroom education. So I was able to teach, and explore these places I really loved. And as I was doing that, I would take whatever martial arts class was available in whatever town I was living in. So when I was in Maine, I worked up on Katahdin, up in Baxter State Park in northern Maine, which is the northern terminus of the Appalachian Trail. That was my first outdoor job. I was in the trail crew first, and then...
What does that mean? What do you do there?
For trail crew?
Mm-hmm.
You move gravel, a lot of it. Yeah, no, you learn to run a chainsaw. We built bog bridges. You repair trails, essentially. So you fix trails, you build bridges. So all of the trails that you see in state and national parks, there are some 20-year-old or 18-year-old kids out there that are moving the rocks a lot of times and building that and making it look really seamless with the land. So it was cool work. I thought I knew how to hike before that. I had no idea. It was a learning experience, a steep learning curve.
Is a bog bridge where you just throw a lot of shit into like a little ravine until you can walk across it?
No, it's you've probably seen a bog bridge. It's a split log, and then it has two smaller logs underneath of it.
Why do they call it a bog bridge?
It's a way to put a quick area of trail across a really marshy area. They don't last that long. They only last, you're lucky if you can get 10 years out of it if it's a really wet area. But if it's an area where you'd have to sink a ton of gravel and a ton of rock to build a base for the trail, they'll throw a bog bridge in so people can just get across that little area and just replace it every 10 years or so.
So you were working for the Forest Service in Maine. Is that
actually that was a state park in northern Maine, Baxter State Park.
Did that help you get your wilderness ranger job in Alaska though?
It helped with some of that experience. I actually got that job. The woman who was running the program had graduated from the same university as me, and so she was taking interns. So my first job there was an internship with a woman who had graduated from my same program, or the same school anyway.
Where was it in Alaska?
It was on Prince of Wales Island, which is a really large island in southeast Alaska. It's not a far flight from Seattle, but it's in the Tongass National Forest, which is our largest national forest. And it's a temperate rainforest, so it's raining all the time, and it's beautiful. I wanted to, see some other areas of the country. Alaska's incredible. I really only saw southeast. I didn't see much of the interior, so that's still on the bucket list. And so there I did small programs, trail, little guided hikes and classroom education and things like that. Sometimes helped other crews if they needed support. Just people to carry things or just extra hands. We'd get to go out. And then through that program, I became aware of the Kayak Ranger program, which was on a neighboring island, Revilla Island, where Ketchikan is. And I applied for that job and was able to get it the next year because at that point I'd worked for the Forest Service a little bit and kind of knew the area. And it's so rainy there, and it's not super remote in terms of Alaska, but they get a lot of people that come out there, and it rains so much they just leave. So the fact that
meaning they were going to stay there
for the season, they come out and they say, I'm going to work here, and it rains every day, and it's kind of cold even in the summer, and they say to themselves, I could be somewhere else, and they bail. So the fact that I'd been there for a season and wanted to come back was compelling, and I had the education, and I did not have the field skills. So that was, again, another steep learning curve in terms of carrying a gun. We had to carry a shotgun for bears, and I had to learn to sea kayak. I'd done a little whitewater kayaking and a little kayaking on lakes and things, and I'd gone through some whitewater training in northern Maine, but I was by no means a water expert. We had to drive a small motorboat too. So to get out to our field station, which was in the middle of Misty Fjords, a wilderness area, we either had to take a 23-foot Boston whaler or a seaplane. So one of us had to drive. And so eventually I got my boating license and I was able to drive us out, or we would fly out in a float plane, which was beautiful. It was like an hour and a half in the motorboat. But there were some days where we just couldn't go. It was too rough. It was a tumultuous area, a lot of inlets and access to the Pacific. So it just depended on the day.
How long did you stay there for?
Let's see. I did, I think, just 3 seasons. I had 2 seasons as a wilderness ranger, and then another one. I had one on Prince of Wales. So, yeah.
What did you do in the winters?
In the winter, I came down and worked in the Flathead National Forest, and I did avalanche safety education. And that was mostly classroom stuff, and then I would get to go out with the avalanche rangers. Sometimes they would do forecasts, so we would get to snowmobile up, and they would dig a pit and do surveys, and then we would get to ski down, which was pretty awesome. I learned a lot
Fresh
too.
tracks, if you will.
Yeah, fresh tracks. I mean, sometimes better than others, but I learned a lot. The guys that were doing it at the time, Stan Bones, Tony Willits, they're kind of local legends. And, Stan, I think at that point had been doing it for 25 years. So it was really cool to get to work with him, and learned a lot from both of those guys about both backcountry travel and avalanche safety, reading snowpacks, snowmobiling, which I'm still pretty terrible at.
Nelson keeps trying to tell me to get a snowmobile. So does Pete, by the way.
Yeah. I mean, backcountry it's if you're not good at it, it's a lot of digging. Maybe if you are good at it, it's a lot of digging too.
He sends me a lot of pictures with like a handlebar sticking out of the snow, and that's about it.
Yeah.
So I feel like he's digging.
Yeah.
Had you found jiu-jitsu at this point, or was it just random that you had found that job in the Flathead?
No, I hadn't. I actually, my very first jiu-jitsu experience was at a rec center in Alaska. So at that point, I'd taken Aikido, Taekwondo, Kung Fu.
You were basically Jason Bourne.
Different types of karate, you would think, right? But I still hadn't found that blend. I was looking for a team. I was looking for a good workout, and I did want it to be functional. I was traveling a lot by myself at the time, and I went into a class that was essentially an MMA, a group of guys training MMA. And I was in my karate uniform with a white belt on because I was being super humble. I'm not wearing my black belts because I'm a new student in this class. And every other class I went into, they're like, yeah, you are a new student and you're starting over and you have to learn all our katas and the way we stand and all of these words, but just in a different language, in Korean, not Japanese, or whatever they were doing. And most of them couldn't really explain the function. I went to a few classes where the instructor talked the entire time. We didn't even really do anything. Went to a few where they were really belittling the students. They were really leaning on that dojo hierarchy and kind of used it as a way to boss people around or make them feel bad, and not as a way to build people up. I also encountered some really awesome people that were just super positive, really trying to give people a positive outlet at the university or wherever they were, and were just great people. And it was all of the benefits that you'd want to get out of martial arts being around those people. But then I saw it used the other way, where they just used it as a control thing and were not very nice to students. And that's a huge red flag to me. And you can't do it as much in jiu-jitsu. You do see it in jiu-jitsu, but at some point, the teacher has to get on the mat and roll. And in a traditional martial arts academy, the teacher doesn't spar very much. They just kind of stand in front of the class, and sometimes they don't even do the workout. The good ones do, but a lot of them don't. And so it allows them to just kind of stand there, and some of them are in really bad shape and just kind of, yell at students. And that's harder to do in a boxing gym or a judo gym or a jiu-jitsu gym. At some point, you had to prove yourself through sparring. And so it really changes the dynamic from teacher-centered to student-centered, I think.
Why do you think, I know the environment you're talking about, it's almost like a militaristic, shouting, negative reinforcement, degrading environment. Why do you think people pay money and tolerate that shit?
It's their first experience a lot of times. And I have known people that have gone through jiu-jitsu gyms where there was a similar environment. And because it was their first experience, they thought that that's how martial arts training should be.
I mean, I've never eaten dog shit. Okay. But if I went out and took a little, even though it was my first experience, would say, I don't like dog shit. Mm-hmm. I wonder, it's the same thing.
An interesting comparison.
To me, they're basically one and the same.
Yeah.
They might be on different sides of the same carton, but they're in the same box. Mm-hmm. I asked that because I love the McDojo stuff, but I don't generally watch the person demonstrating the breathing technique that is knocking people over across the room. I'm fascinated by the person allowing themselves to be knocked over, or the other people in the room who I have to believe, to maintain any faith in humanity, realize that they know what is happening is bullshit. And then I'm fascinated to know why they're participating in it.
The classes are often pretty small, and I think the turnover was relatively high. There'd always be like a few hardcore students that had been there a long time and were just like, this is the way, and, you know, sensei knows best kind of thing.
Does he, though?
I mean, not always. So, you know, I saw some totally different examples of that too. Just people who they would get up there and they would sweat right with the students, and they were super positive and encouraging, and they were happy if you were there, and, you know, hoping you would come back. And so you see both. You really do. But it's just an environment that lends itself to those people who want to be in a position to push people around, unfortunately.
I don't like those people.
No.
I have a very visceral negative reaction to them, as you know.
Yeah. And it became really easy to spot those as I went from gym to gym. And so when I was choosing a jiu-jitsu gym, you know, I had looked at a lot of schools and I'd seen a lot of different examples of what it meant to be a martial arts instructor and a leader. Yeah. And so my first experience in Alaska, it was more just kind of a collection of people. And some were wrestlers. One guy was, I think, a purple belt and had done some MMA. So he was sort of leading the class. There was another guy who was a blue belt. And then there were just some high school wrestlers and just whatever random person walked in that day. And I had the experience of drilling, and we were in side control. The person's to the side, chest to the chest, holding the other person down. And we had worked on an escape, but this scrawny little kid held me down for the whole round. And I was trying to do the escape. I think it was a knee elbow escape, and he had his knee right by my hip, and he had just enough wrestling experience. He'd done like middle school wrestling. You know, he wasn't the pride of Alaska wrestling. And he had just enough experience where he could pin me. And I thought, just like every other white belt, I'm going to really freak out, just see red, and I'm going to push him off, you know, because I was a wilderness ranger and a black belt and just kind of generally a badass in my mind. And I could not get out, and I just freaked out and tried to push him off. And he just kind of surfed my movement and stayed on top of me, and I never got out. And I was like, holy cow. I just got held down by a kid who's about 20 pounds lighter than me. Before we trained, he said, you know, at one point I broke my femur in football, and it's pretty much healed, but I'm a little worried about it. You know, I mean, he was just not someone you'd think was going to run you over or hold you down. And so I said, okay, I've been just traveling by myself and feeling like I had some idea of how to deal with this situation. I realized I really didn't. And it was a very hard workout. We did a cardio circuit. We did some stand-up. I got knocked off my feet, which I thought was cool at the time. Now I realize was probably not the best. And it wasn't, the person didn't do it on purpose, but I got knocked down in boxing sparring. And I said, okay, this is real. I'm having to deal with dynamic movement and all these strikes and what will really happen if I engage with a male attacker, not going full out. But I really enjoyed the grappling part. I realized we could do that at a pretty high pace, and I wasn't going to get punched in the face. I wasn't enjoying that part. So it's like, I want to do more grappling.
I don't know anybody who really looks forward to getting popped in the face.
It's different. Yeah, it's definitely a little more personal, at least to me, than getting held down. But some people, it's the opposite. They would rather be standing up and not that part, you know. I don't know.
To each their own, I suppose.
Yeah, I guess. So I went down to Montana, and I just realized I did 3 seasons as a wilderness ranger, 3 seasons as a sea kayak ranger, which was such a cool job. And the program was partially privately funded. So when the economy tanked in 2008, they're like, maybe we don't need wilderness rangers. We were boarding cruise ships that were coming into Misty Fjord, small cruise ships, and giving nature programs, so educating about what was around us, which was spectacular. I mean, spotting wildlife and whales and eagles and all different types of birds. And we would board, sometimes we would be spike camped out, so we'd paddle out of the wilderness and do this dramatic boarding of the cruise ship, you know, and then just paddle back out. Sometimes we'd come from our field station and be out for 10 to 14 days at a time. We'd do some trail work out there, some wilderness site monitoring, and some wildlife monitoring too. So we had kind of a few things we were doing out there. Sometimes in the Discovery Center in town. So it was still education, but there was a field component, which I just loved. That was one of my favorite jobs I ever had.
So it was accidental, though, that you found yourself in the Flathead before moving here full time?
Yeah, a little bit.
I mean, it wasn't jiu-jitsu, I guess.
Yeah, it came down for snowboarding.
Yeah.
And was seeing a guy at the time that was from here.
Fuck that guy.
So
I don't like that guy.
I saw a poster on the wall and I was like, where's that? And he's like, that's where I'm from. I said, okay. So we went down, and I ended up getting a job as a snowboard instructor, and which was funny because I had all this education at the time, and that was the job I could find here. And I snowboarded 7 days a week. It was awesome.
What year was that?
It's probably like 2000. The first time, maybe like 2006.
Okay.
2007, something like that.
That was a good piece ago.
Yeah, now it was. Yeah. So
How much smaller was the valley back then?
Well, now.
I mean, obviously the valley was actually, for everybody out there, I'm not that dumb. The valley is actually the same size. I should say the population difference.
Yeah. Well, when I first came, there wasn't a Walmart. I remember when we got the Walmart, and I haven't been here that long comparatively, but it was, there was not any of the housing or big box stores between Whitefish and Kalispell. Those were just fields. And
how about like Lowe's and Home Depot and Costco?
No, none of that was there.
Really?
And, yeah.
Just fields?
Yeah.
Okay.
It was pretty easy. I feel like maybe Lowe's was there, but there might have been the hardware store. But I remember getting the Walmart distinctly. And just much easier to find housing, of course, seasonally. It was I used to drive down from Alaska and just look at apartment listings on Craigslist and then just get one on the spot pretty much. Like, it wasn't I didn't have to do it that far before. I would just do it during the shoulder season. And then taught snowboarding. Eventually, at first I was volunteering with the Forest Service. They do snowshoe hikes for all of the fourth graders in the valley. We do a snow science education program. So I just volunteered with them. And then the next season I got a job doing that, leading those snowshoe hikes. And you go to any store in the valley or classroom where they want to have a snow science education, just kind of a brief overview of avalanche safety. And we would do that. And again, that was partially privately funded too. So
wasn't that also like specifically fourth graders? Wasn't there like a tragic incident with a fourth grader that caused that?
There was, yeah. And the woman, the mother was a teacher. And so she made it after that. Every fourth grader in the valley would go through this education program. And it was...
if it was a he or a she, die in an avalanche?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, he didn't make it.
Where was the avalanche?
Behind Big Mountain. So
he was off under the ropes?
Yeah. Yeah, he had boot packed up and triggered a slide.
Okay.
So... yeah, it was, there was a nonprofit that had funded it at the time. And again, 2008 hit and the funding was just not there for either job. So both of them were going to change drastically. I would have still had the one in Alaska. The one in Montana was momentarily going away. And they said, you're going to work in the Discovery Center now, and which is essentially a plastic rainforest. And I was like, oh man, I just don't know if I can do that. And
do you mean the one at the Summit House?
No, that was at the Tongass National Forest
okay.
in Ketchikan. And every day, really big cruise ships come into that city. And my work was out in the field and dealing with the smaller ships, but you would do that tour, multiple times a day. And I'd done that kind of pre-season. You do the same tour, over and over, which you can make it fun. And it was a beautiful Discovery Center there. It still is. But it was just going to be a big departure from what I had done. And so I said, well, I had been considering maybe going back to school. I felt like I needed something kind of recession-proof, so I went back to school for classroom education and moved to Portland, where at that point, when I came down to the Flathead, after I'd tried jiu-jitsu the first time, I was up there for a few weeks. I came down, I said, there's no way there's going to be jiu-jitsu in the Flathead, because I'd looked at other schools. There were a couple martial arts schools. I think there was an Aikido school and a type of karate. And Travis, my coach, was just opening the first Straight Blast gym here. So he had bought mats and a space from another instructor and was in the process of converting it into an SBG. And he had broken off from his coach's gym in Portland. So
how big was the gym space? Like, in comparison to this room, like the mat space, I should say.
Maybe twice this. Yeah, it was really small. It's across the street from where the gym is now. And we walked through the mat into a windowless room, and that was the yoga studio. And they, at the time, I didn't realize, had gotten laid off of their jobs too. Because Travis was teaching construction, or he was running a construction company, and Kisa was a realtor, and they have 4 kids, and they were in a really rough spot. I didn't know the gym had suddenly become their only business. They were doing a little bit of house building, but this was really all their eggs in one basket. And I was one of the first 6 or 7 students. I walked in, it was just a bunch of dudes in there, and they were all at that point wrestlers or MMA fighters. And I asked Keisa, I'm like, is it okay that I'm here? And she's like, what do you mean? I'm like, is it okay do you want women here? You know, because I'd encountered some resistance. My mom had some bad experiences. She was in more traditional martial arts. And so I was saying, you know, is there a place for me here, basically? And she's like, yeah, of course. Why wouldn't there be? You know? And I said, okay. And it used to be you just rolled the first day. So I was immediately just wrestling people. Had a little bit of experience we did Aikijitsu as part of the karate style. So we'd done a little grappling, and I knew like an arm bar from mount. So I remember arm barring a dude the first day. They're like, does she know any jujitsu? And believe me, I never did anything offensive to that dude ever again. Like all the other guys were making fun of him, and it was just like, I just got wrecked from that point on. And
Travis was probably a purple belt at this time?
He was a brown belt, I think, when I met him. So when he moved here and he initially opened, I think he was a purple belt. So he was a brown belt.
Now a 4-stripe black belt, just some context and where he's traveled.
Yeah. I mean, so this was 15 years ago now. So yeah, I started with him as a white belt. And of that first group, most of us became black belts, which is kind of cool to think about. I think there were 7 or 8 of us, and I think like 6 of us made it to black belt.
So I know of Ryan Hussey.
Ryan.
Because
Gus,
he's the one who checked me in and received me when I joined SBG, and for an hour and a half would not take my credit card, even though I was desperately trying to get the fuck out of there.
He's very thorough, yeah.
This is our monthly pricing. I'd like to pay in full. Well, here's the yearly pricing. And I literally had my credit card out, and many hours later.
Yeah.
It's a positive. I think it's a net positive. He didn't do the intakes anymore. I like Ryan very much. So he, though, is a black belt. Who else was in that group?
Gus he joined shortly, maybe 6 months after me. And I always tell this story. I almost triangled him the first day. He didn't know how to tap. And he's like 6'7". I looked over at Travis and I had him in a triangle. Travis said, you should tap if you feel it. And he was turning all red and he was just kind of scowling at me. He came in he had twin pink mohawks and he's 6'7". He's been building cabinets for a bunch of years, so he was really strong. And I should have choked him unconscious because when I came back, he just you couldn't deal with him.
And he is now the head coach in Missoula.
Yeah.
For people who live down there. He no longer has twin pink mohawks.
He doesn't. He has normal hair now, but he had that for years.
So Gus, Travis's wife, Keisa, black belt. So that's 4.
Yeah. And then Jake, who is in a different state now, but he was one of Travis's first students.
He's the one who came back and did the Iron Man for his brown belt, right?
No. Nope, that's Zach.
Okay.
So he'll probably be a black belt at some point. He's out in South Dakota or North Dakota.
Just doing oil rig jiu-jitsu.
Probably, yeah.
Just roughneck
Keep
jiu-jitsu.
waiting for him to get worse, but it hasn't happened yet. So, yeah.
There's only one person I've seen do a lot of jiu-jitsu and get worse, and for their benefit, I'm not going to mention their name, even though all 3 of us in this room know exactly who I'm talking about.
Sometimes I feel like that, so it ebbs and flows. And I'm trying to think of who else in that initial group.
Even that, though, statistically is incredibly anomalous. Let's say it was 4 out of 7. That's way more than your average.
Well, at first, the people who did jiu-jitsu were kind of that top 10% that were probably going to get good anywhere. And then the gym evolved and we created a bigger beginner program and had people learn some skill before they rolled. And it really helped, you know.
You mean from a retention perspective?
Yes. It turns out teaching people some basic skills before you make them fight each other allows more people to stay in the sport and is less stressful.
I can see the pros and cons of that.
Yes.
On the pro side, you have more business. On the con, a little bit less fun for the people who know what they're doing.
You can find those people on any mat. You know, if there's a mat that has a big range of people, those that are less aggressive or less athletic and those that want to be competitive athletes, you know, I think a healthy gym has that range. And then they have some practices that are maybe just for those competitive athletes too. So they're getting their work in. But I think that's a healthy gym. At the time, we were all competitors and we were all younger and we were all just kind of going for it.
So how'd you end up in Portland?
Again, those jobs kind of went away and I had to pivot. It's hard to find a job in the Valley. And I wanted something that was, again, kind of recession proof in my mind anyway. So I went back I got a job with Audubon and then that was seasonal and then ended up going to graduate school, getting my teaching certificate for science teaching in a classroom. And I did that for a few years, and it just wasn't a great fit for me. I didn't love high school, and I kind of put myself back on a high school schedule, back on that curriculum. The curriculum didn't change much from when I was a biology teacher. And, I had a really challenging first teaching position too. And I honestly, I didn't do as well as I could have. I should have dropped everything else I was doing and just focused on that. But I tried to kind of keep too many balls in the air. I was trying to train for worlds, and jiu-jitsu, and I was teaching snowboard lessons at Mount Hood, and I was trying to balance this really tough, demanding teaching job. And so it didn't go that well. So I was spending more and more time doing jiu-jitsu, and that's, a summer came up where Travis had called me, and he was at every one of my Ironmans. I did a few Ironmans. So when we get a colored belt in jiu-jitsu, you have a match with each one of your teammates as kind of a jiu-jitsu high five, like, good job, And so I had...
Oh, it's not a high five.
It's conceptually, it's a conceptual high five. And
it's a battle to the death.
No, not really. And so Travis had come out to all my Ironmans in Portland, and that was his coach. The SBG headquarters, Straight Blast Gym headquarters, is in Portland. So I trained with his coach there. And
Matt's been on the podcast.
Yep.
Matt Thornton.
Yep. And Matt was the head coach there. And I learned from some of his black belts, brown belts, purple belts. And, kind of, I got to black belt at that gym. And, again, Travis came out for all of those. I was going back here for at least a week to just train and kind of reconnect with everybody. And I did always love the Valley. So it's at a certain point he called and said he had a full-time position open here in jiu-jitsu. So kind of, shelved the teaching for a little bit, at least high school science teaching, and kind of took a risk and came here and just hadn't looked back. I've been doing it full time, just teaching and training full time since then.
How many years did you spend cumulatively in college post high school?
Well, I had the 4-year degree and then kind of another 4 after that for master's degrees that were basically redundant, like science teaching, but you have to go back and get the teaching certificate. There's a lot of general education courses that you have to take. And of course, I found a really difficult way to do it. Portland used to have a program that was specifically for science teachers. So you had to do a research component on top of your student teaching, which was actually really hard. But you're making the same pretty much afterward, maybe a little more. And I don't know. It was a challenging way to do it because the student teaching is a lot by itself.
I ask because 2 reasons. One, I don't have any experience, this, in anything beyond high school, which I barely successfully completed. And mostly, if I'm being honest, just because I absolutely was not interested. I was just kind of looking at what was going to be next. But 2, Tyler, who lives with us, is beginning his journey into academia.
Oh, yes.
And I'm curious, what would you change about your academic path? Like, so let's say you had a crystal ball, you're back at that age, and you could kind of forecast how much time you're going to spend in academia versus those other things. What would you change?
I would have done the first graduate degree because that led me to that Wilderness Ranger job and the outdoor education. The classroom education, I had spent a good amount of time in classrooms teaching as an environmental educator, as a tutor. I was part of a really cool program called AVID. I don't even know if it exists anymore, where you're helping actually kind of middle of the road students. So they can't be failing and they're not getting A's. They're just like in the middle. And you use the Socratic method. It was a really cool program. And so I had spent a bunch of time with students doing that in Portland. So I thought I had enough classroom time. You shadow a student, you student teach. But the reality of it was it just really grinds you down, especially your first year. And so I don't think I would have done that second degree, that second master's degree program. It was probably more than I needed and a little bit, again, redundant to what I'd already done. I don't know what I would have done in that time. I probably would have needed to leave Portland, which I just wasn't ready to do at that point. The unemployment rate was so high there. I worked in a coffee shop when I was going to grad school for a while. There was absolutely no other job, so it was kind of a hard time. And a lot of people ended up having to kind of pivot or shift careers during that point. And a lot of us millennials had just all of this education and debt and not a lot of place to throw it at, and I'd been raised to believe that was going to translate directly into a job, and I think I had one financial aid officer at one point say, hey, how exactly are you going to pay this off? And I'm like, oh, well, I'm going to be a high school teacher, highly paid professional. So no problem paying off all this debt, which, was a bad call.
I think it's kind of criminal, the predatory nature of educational lending. It's beyond any of the boundaries that they set up for responsible lending and anything else.
For sure. You could never get a mortgage for the
How
amount.
about even a car?
Yeah, true.
Actually, I take that back. If you're in the military, they will give you a loan. There's a reason that there are multiple car dealerships within miles of the front gate of military installations.
Yeah.
And there are signs that literally say, if you are in the military, you will be approved for a loan. It might be at 38% interest, but that Ford Mustang is not going to buy itself. That E4 is not, actually in this day and age, it's probably a Corvette.
A bonus has to go somewhere, I guess, right?
Your bonus as an E4 might be 4 digits. Maybe 5 if you're in a raid. So you might be getting 10 grand.
Yeah.
No, if you're at E4 and you don't have a car payment that's $1,700, I don't even know if you're living right.
Yeah, I guess it's all over. I feel like Tyler has a much better understanding of kind of what he's getting into.
The numbers, he's looking at doing in-state, which is going to help for sure. But what they charge for education and the fact that they will layer debt on top of debt on top of debt, I don't think that they should be able to do that. I don't think that saddling a young man or woman in their early 20s with close to 6 figures, if not 6 figures of debt, is really setting anybody up for success.
Well, the credit hours cost the same regardless of your career path. So you could be pursuing a career where you would be able to pay that off, or you might be trying to be a teacher, and a lot of people go they'll get a job in, a community that's high needs. And if you do that for 10 years, you will have your debt expunged, and they're doing a lot better at approving those. For a while, it was rare to see it approved. They'd find some loophole where you hadn't made your payments in consecutive enough or enough time or whatever it was. And so a lot of those people weren't getting that approved. Now it's happening more, but at the time you're working a really tough job and probably not getting paid very much. So you kind of trade 10 years of your life either way. So it's challenging. And then, there maybe are some people paying that same amount that are going to have a career that actually, maybe they can pay that debt off in a reasonable amount of time and still have a decent standard of living for teaching and some of the other, it's like you can get an English degree or an art degree, and it's like you're going to come out with the same debt, but whether you can convert that into a living, they don't help you with that, And again, I had one person ask me, I think, in all those years.
What would you, for somebody Tyler's age, what would you recommend to them when they're looking at that journey? If they know that they can get the money, but they're unsure of what the end state is going to be.
I think if you're not really sure, and I thought I was really sure at the time, but I think it's a good idea to take a gap year, kind of like Tyler did, where you just work and maybe do some traveling and see some different places. Really try to be around the people who are working the profession that you are and see how happy they are, see what their job satisfaction is later in their career. Do they have to work more than one job to support a family and have a house? What does their work-life balance look like? And just kind of really explore it before you dive headlong into it. But at the time, it was just kind of like, which college are you going to when you graduate? I went when I was 17. It wasn't even a thought,
I was academically ineligible to go to college at 17.
I doubt that.
I had a 1.8 GPA.
Okay. Well, you did well on what is the military achievement test?
The ASVAB?
The ASVAB, yeah.
A monkey with a crayon could do well on that test. Here's some of the questions.
You scored at a level where they wanted you to be, a nuclear something?
They wanted me to be a nuclear technician.
Yeah. So you did pretty well.
Or they don't get a lot of people who really want to join the military, and just because I was on the upper end of the ASVAB score doesn't necessarily mean that I was head and shoulders above everybody else.
I don't know. Your career would suggest otherwise.
My career
very self-depreciating.
My career, let me be very honest, did not select for intelligence. I could teach a pygmy monkey or an albino monkey to do everything that I did in my career.
I don't think that's true.
I could teach them the actual tasks. Some of the problem-solving stuff would be a little bit difficult, but I actually would be terrified to see a horde of monkeys coming at me with M4s. That would be a shitty day.
Yeah, I think so.
Night vision goggles, ballistic vests, albino monkeys. I would run.
Yeah, let's.
You only have to outrun one, So
I mean, I guess I don't think that's a good training program.
no, the military test. The barrier to entry is it's not incredibly high. And a lot of I think there's an English component, a math component. Some of the questions they would put, I remember, and I have no idea if this is still the same, but it would be a visual representation of wheels with gears. And they would say, if the first wheel is moving in this direction, which direction is the last one moving? So it's, you're like, right, left, I'm going to go with that. It is not, you're not taking the LSATs or the MCATs. I'll put it that way.
Yeah. Okay.
So, all right. So you're in Portland. Mm-hmm. You're training at Matt's gym. How many other women were training there at that time?
Really, just one, and we both made it to black belt. We were the first.
Your nemesis?
She's not my nemesis. Yeah, no.
All right.
She was a training partner, and your early training partners really do help shape your jiu-jitsu. And we really it was only 4 years, which at this point is kind of a fraction of the time I've spent doing jiu-jitsu, but those are kind of formative years. So it was really important to have another female training partner that was very serious, and she was a very high-level competitor. And we were the first 2 female black belts in Oregon.
And you guys get your black belts the same day, right?
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. When you started doing jiu-jitsu, how long into it until you did your first competition?
I think I competed the first year with Travis. He was really he's a very competitive person, and
Travis is.
Yeah.
Shocker.
He loved competing, and I enjoyed competing growing up, and I'd done individual sports. I'd done gymnastics, which I was terrible at, and springboard diving and, softball, but things where you kind of had a team, but there was an individual responsibility and you were kind of out there on your own at some point. So it kind of fit in well, the jiu-jitsu part. And that was the first time I actually rolled with another female, was my first jiu-jitsu competition.
Do you remember your first ever match?
I do. Yeah.
Do tell. White belt?
Oh yeah. Yeah. We were both white belts.
Did you pull a guard or to go takedown?
I think I got taken down. And I think my plan was to do a takedown, and I think I immediately got double-legged. And I put her into a triangle, which shocked her too. She wasn't used to women being very good at jiu-jitsu. I think I almost choked her. She ended up stacking me, and I think she won the first match and I won the second match. But she was a fair amount smaller than me, but they just put all of us together.
So it was a local competition?
Oh yeah, it was in Montana somewhere. We drove out to like Helena or something. I don't even remember. And there just happened to be one other female there. And so that was the first time I competed, and then kept doing it after that. I really enjoyed that part. And it was the only time I really got to roll with other women that were my size or my rank. That was another big motivation. Is, it's the best measure of your jiu-jitsu if you can find somebody who's your size, your strength. In terms of the sport, not in terms of self-defense, but in terms of the sport, that's where you can really kind of see what you can pull off or not. And so I would seek that out. And especially once you get to purple belt, at the time, it was very hard to find competitors that were our size, our rank. I remember our first purple belt, Amanda Lowen was my teammate from Portland, and our first purple belt competition, we competed in the men's division.
Really?
Yeah, which didn't go my way. And I was like,
it's very 2024.
I think
early,
she won a
You
match.
know what I mean?
And the promoter knew who we were and knew we weren't going to get hurt or anything. He's like, they probably won't. Maybe they're not going to win, but they can hold their own. We were training a lot at the time. And I was like, okay, I don't need to pay to lose matches, to men. Like I can do that in the gym. So yeah. I did okay. I held my own, but I think I ended up losing. I think I did get submitted. But it was a good match,
How was your progression through the belts? How long did you spend at each belt?
I think I total was 6 years, but I trained a lot. There was a point in Portland where I think I was training like 3 times a day. I just kind of really threw myself into it and was competing every chance I got. So you put in the hours one way or another. I think, if you're training a couple, 2-3 days a week, it might take 10 years. I think they gave us our black belts a little quickly too, so we could compete as adults in the black belt division, which is really, all the other belts, you win a competition at blue or purple, there's all these belts ahead of you, So at black belt, if you win at black belt, it's like you won at black belt at the adult level. And that's a big deal. And there's a short time where you can do that, where you're going to be able to keep up. So I'm grateful that I got to have that experience and compete a few years at the adult black belt level before I moved on to masters.
Well, we're not going to gloss over that, and correct me if I'm wrong. How did you do at Worlds at blue belt?
I won at blue belt at my second year, but it's, at that level you can win, especially at my weight. I'm a little heavier, just being a good athlete and being aggressive, can get you there. I think things have changed now. And then as the belts go up, it gets harder and harder. And then black belt, you're really jumping into the deep end of the pool. My first match at Worlds, the absolute was before your actual weight class, and you could just sign up at the time. Now you have to qualify, but at the time there were so few women, they're like, just do it if you want to. Good luck. So my first match was against Michelle Nicolini, who was a 3-stripe black belt at the time, and she's
You're talking about as a black belt, your first?
Yes.
Okay.
And she was like a 7-time world champion. She's much smaller than me, but just a long-time competitor, and that was my first match. So you get to have some really cool matches just because there were so few women in the division. I didn't win. We went the whole time, and I lost by points, but got to have some matches against some of the best women in the world just right off because it was such a small community. But she had been a black belt longer than I'd been training jiu-jitsu, and that was my first match. So once you get to the black belt level, people are always like, oh, I don't want to compete. I don't think I'm good enough yet. It doesn't get easier as you go up. And especially once you get to black belt, then you stay a black belt. So you're going to end up going against people that, especially if you started, I started when I was 26. So you're going to go against people that started when they were 5 and they're 20.
It's a deep ocean.
Yeah, it is.
It's a
very deep ocean. So might as well compete as a white belt and a blue belt and just kind of have fun with it if you want to. It's not required. But if you have thoughts about doing it, I wouldn't say wait.
How many competitive matches do you think you've done, ballpark?
Oh, I don't know. I really don't. I'd have to crunch some numbers. I wasn't competing as I have talked to some peers that really got into it, and I was competing probably 4 or 5 times a year, at the most, at the height of when I was competing, I think I talked to one of our guys from Birmingham, Kenneth, the other day, and I was like, oh, how much are you competing these days? He's like, oh, not nearly as much, only 8 times a year. And I'm like, oh my gosh, so there's some people that they're doing it once or twice a month. You look at Matt Inman out in England, who was over 100 matches before he got hurt by the end of the year.
Just don't watch the last one if you want to keep your food down.
He is back on the mat. He is back in the mat.
First off,
he's a machine.
There are edge cases for everything. And for human beings, he's an edge case. I don't know how and I'm not joking when I tell people it would be hard for them to find the video, but there is a video out there of this man's knee bending in a direction far enough that I would have thought that's a full reconstruction.
His opponent jumped guard on him, which can be a dangerous move. Jump and you wrap your legs around your partner, and if you are not quite ready or if you don't quite step wrong, I've seen a couple people's knees bend backward, including his in that video, but I've also seen it happen live, and it's not allowed in the white belt division anymore, but somehow, he didn't tear anything. So he just, he's already back at it. Who knows how many matches he'll do next year.
A lot. Do you have out of all the matches that you have done, do you have one that rises to the top that is the most memorable for you?
The most memorable, probably I had some at the adult level. Those were all just so close. If I won, it was just a lot of times it was by points. They were just so contentious. I was a new black belt, and it was either I was going against a new black belt or I was getting wrecked by a girl that just made me look like I'd never done jiu-jitsu. There wasn't a lot in between there, I'd battle, and I got silver in Pan Am's one year, but I battled my way up to, it was like the first few girls were new-ish black belts. And then, my last match was, against a woman who was kind of a career practitioner, and she just walked through me. I mean, she was beating everyone at the time. She was winning the absolute and her weight and everything. So, there was a big gap between me and that and that top spot, but it was very cool to have that experience. Probably I had some really good matches at the masters level. So those same years I was competing at the adult level, I did masters as well. So I was like masters 1, I was in my early to mid 30s, and had some matches where I felt like I was able to really execute my game plan and submit opponents. And I only had 5 minutes, so you kind of have to go for it. In the adult black belt division, you have 10 minutes.
That doesn't work for us old folk. We need 5. Otherwise we're going to have heart issues.
It's kind of harder because it's a sprint, you have to kind of make it. It's actually a much higher paced match than, those 10-minute matches. You'll see some kind of a little more stalling, I guess, or
you have time
waiting.
For strategy.
Yes, and you can recover a little more. 5 minutes, it's like you better make it happen, So I've had a couple that, I won a couple years and was probably at my peak in terms of like physical shape and just what I was able to pull off, at that time. I think I'm more technical now, but physically maybe a little faster, stronger, less injuries, at that time. So I think those were some of my favorite matches I did competitively. And it was just cool to have Travis there, who'd been my coach, and since white belt, essentially in my corner, and he'd been in the corner of all my major matches. Even when I was training out of Portland, he would travel, leave his family, leave the gym to come coach me, so that was a big deal.
Where did your MMA fights fall into this?
Oh my gosh. I came back to Montana and I was competing a lot. And again, it was kind of that quest to be like, I can defend myself. I know how I will react in a fight. And it was so much harder than I thought I was already a black belt in Jiu Jitsu. So I'm like, I'll just add some striking. I'll just add some clinch. Oh my gosh. Those practices, it was just like having an amateur MMA fight every Saturday. And it was all guys, of course, other than Jen Moody, formerly Jen Johnson, who's just a stud. And she was a boxer at the time. And I did jiu-jitsu. So it was like, was she going to punch me in the face or was I going to take her down? So we had tough matches, and then everybody else was a guy and they were actively competing as well. So just getting tuned up, and you have to be able to get to your strong range to use it, and you start standing. So it was very humbling, very tiring, pushed me to my very limit. I had a couple legit panic attacks in practice, which I'd never had in jiu-jitsu. So I had to learn. We had a mental health counselor at the time that was also a boxing coach. He has a business here, Evoke Changes, and he helped me kind of deal with that. We actually put an altitude mask, one of those oxygen,
a Bane mask?
Yeah, one of those like altitude restriction masks on, and we did a bunch of hitting pads, and then he did some grounding exercises so I could, when I was getting to that point where I was feeling overwhelmed, it was usually striking, like I was totally redlined cardio, and then someone would be on top of me, like punching me in the face. Not hard, not to the point where I was going to be, not in a way that I was like loving life down there, but I wasn't like getting broken. Like it was, it's practice. So you're wearing practice gloves. It's tough to deal with the red line though. Oh yeah. It really changes things. And if I got to a point where I kind of knew I couldn't get out, but it wasn't the end of the round yet, it was very different mentally. I never had that issue in jiu-jitsu. It's a lot slower sport than MMA. So kind of was able to work through that. And you learn a lot about yourself. And then my first fight was against a girl who was so much smaller than me. There's no commission in Montana, so it was ridiculous. And the first thing that happened is I went out and I went to throw a kick, and she just like kind of ran me over, and I ended up on my back. And Gus was cornering me, actually, my buddy Gus that we were talking about, the giant. And I was like, he's going to be so mad at me while I was down there. And she backed up because I was a black belt at the time, and I ended up winning. I ended up like throwing her and getting on top, but it was so messy. You think it's going to be this nice, neat thing, and you're used to sparring people that are all super technical, but she was not afraid, and she was very aggressive, and that counts for something. She wasn't like picking her strikes or being super technical with her footwork. Like, she just came at me.
How'd you feel walking out to the cage for your first time?
Well, I was kind of laughing actually because I remember they gave me the fight at the rules meeting. They were like, we'll just get this girl from her house. It was the first all women's MMA.
What do you mean we'll just get this girl from her house?
Well, there was a potential of me going against her, but there was a size difference, and she was willing to do it. She didn't even have a corner. Someone volunteered to corner her. This stuff happens at amateur fights. And it was the first only women's MMA card in Montana.
Where was this fight conducted?
Gosh, I'm trying to remember where that one was.
I mean, it certainly wasn't the UFC Apex Center. I feel like this was on a sawdust floor with the ring.
Not that one. Were we in Billings for that? No, I don't remember where that one was. But we were in an arena, and I was like, okay, this is what I want my walkout song to be, and I was like, I had this Florence and Machine song picked out, and they're like, yeah, okay. And the lady, I feel like, just crumpled up the piece of paper and threw it in the trash. And I ended up walking out to like let the bodies hit the floor. And so I'm like, what the heck? And so I was just laughing. And the photographer actually took a really cool picture of me walking out. There was a photographer from the paper there because there would never been an all women's card in Montana before. So it was actually really cool. And two of my teammates were on there, like Jen and Marnik Mann, who has gone on to fight in the UFC, was on that card. So it was really cool. And, and I think I was the first fight too. So I was just like, well, we're doing it now. And
so how did it end?
I ended up throwing her and mounting her and just finished with strikes on top. And the ref was so good. I remember at the time, he's like, if you get in a bad spot, just tap. He's like, this is an amateur fight. You don't have to break yourself for this. It's practice basically. So he was really good because there was such a size difference, my ground and pound wasn't great at the time either. So that was good. And then the second one I did that one was outside of Billings, I remember. And that was in a horse arena outside, which was really gross. And they called it backflips and beatdowns because they were flipping dirt bikes over the cage in between rounds. They used to do it during the fights, which I was really glad that wasn't happening because that would have been so distracting.
That's an interesting risk assessment in Matrix.
People were wearing bare feet just right into the cage. I was like, I'm going to end up with hoof and mouth disease or something.
Oh, you mean they were walking on the
horse arena dirt
that had been covered in shit and then,
into the cage.
Fuck yeah.
Yep. So Gus was cornering me again, and I ended up fighting a girl. She was from a Montana gym, and I think she had a little bit of an amateur boxing record, and we didn't realize that. And she hit hard. She was my size. We were the same size. And we had a really gnarly fight. Like, she broke my nose right at the beginning, and I had a concussion. Like, I kind of fell. She went to soccer kick me as I was getting up, which is not really allowed. The ref didn't really do much, but I ended up grabbing her leg and putting her on the ground. And at that point, again, I was kind of out and was just leaning over bleeding, and she was in the corner of the cage. I remember Scott Tometz from Idaho, he's like, you need to hit her. Because I was just standing over her. You revert to what you do, and in grappling, you don't hit. So I was just pinning her against the cage, and I was like, oh, good idea. So it was like, ended the round and mount, and she ended up rolling me at the very end because I was trying to hit, and you're just not as stable. And I was like, oh, man. So I went to the corner, and Gus was so mad. He's just like, you have got to change levels, because I underhooked her, and I didn't want to let go. I wanted to be in the clinch, and so she was just hitting me, and she hit hard. She kicked hard, too. And so we went into the next round, and luckily she was really tired. She was very tired. So I ended up putting her on the cage and throwing her like Uchimata, and we threw her. And I remember just putting everything into it. And I was like, we were both going over, and I'm like, hopefully I land on top here. And got into mount again and ended up just striking. And like, I wasn't within enough to do a submission at that point because she was pushing me. She also punched me in the face from mount bottom, which everyone's like, oh, you can't do that. Trust me, you can. And I mean, it didn't wasn't going to knock me out, but I was like, like, I remember cuffing me in the ear too, like the old ear cuff.
The ear cup? That's some savage ratchet shit.
Well, it's more disorienting than you'd think, so.
No, it's exactly as disorienting as you think.
Yeah. So that was when we were on the cage. Yeah. And I bounced her off the cage. It was something we'd worked on. I'd worked on with Duran from our gym, and you can use the cage to kind of bounce and throw. And I landed on top and was able to just stay in mount until her head was bouncing off the canvas. And so they called it at that point. But to look at us, like I had taken a lot more damage, but it was like, so that was the end of the fight. I think I could have gone another round, but it was, again, kind of humbling. And it was like, I had a gnarly concussion, and it took me a little while to get over that. And I was like, okay, maybe I'm not going to launch a MMA career in my mid to late 30s. It just was a lot of damage. I would have had to work a lot more on striking, and I was still competing in jiu-jitsu, and that was kind of my focus. So I, did it kind of for fun after that, and, still did some training, but that was the last fight I did. And I know that I can handle it if I get hit very hard. Again, my nose broken, and I had a concussion like right in the first 3 minutes, which is not how you want to start a fight. It was just.
Given your experience in jiu-jitsu, how much do you think it actually prepares you for violence?
It depends. I think it depends a little on how you train. If you're doing competition rounds, this is why I recommend people compete. If they want to use their jiu-jitsu in a stressful situation, you should compete, because it simulates that more than anything else. Either do MMA. Doing MMA would be better, even if like jits with hits, because you kind of realize where you can get hit or not. And that was a huge transition when I started jiu-jitsu, because I had kind of a rolly guard at the time. And I remember my buddy Daniel, who runs the Whitefish Gym, waiting for me to kind of overroll back from my cool guard, and he would just punch me right in the face. I mean, not hard, like as a training partner.
As a reminder.
As a reminder, like, hey, you're on your back and this is a fight. Surprise. Better get your feet up. Better get back to your feet. So I would never want to be on my back in a fight, despite being a jiu-jitsu black belt. So you learn that pretty quickly. You learn where you're safe, where you're not. People can punch you from their back. Again, you're not going to probably get knocked out, but it doesn't feel great. So you have to watch your range. You can get kicked, if someone's on their back. So I would say compete and have that adrenaline spike, and it just dials down what you're capable of. You fall to what you've trained over and over and over again. You're not going to pull off new things or things that you have to think a bunch about. You're going to pull off what you're best at and what you've drilled the most. So, if you don't want the first time you do jiu-jitsu under stress to be in a parking lot somewhere, do a little competition. Have people watch you, do a little micro test, and just see how you handle it. There's an adrenaline dump that happens. I've had students come up and be like, I can't close my hands. Like, I can't do another match, or they're like, there's something wrong with me. There's something wrong with me. You get a big spike of, it increases your heart rate, dilates your blood vessels, all of that fight or flight. And then you come down off of it and you just feel exhausted. And, some sugar can help, and you get better at managing that. You'll have less and less of an adrenaline spike. But if you've never experienced that and you have that happen in a real fight, I think it can be a little debilitating. You only last for a few minutes. So just being able to manage that is important.
What about for the hobbyist who comes once or twice a week, but they stay with it for a good amount of time? Do you think that they're lying to themselves if they think that they're ready for violence in the street?
I think they're certainly more prepared than your average person, 100%. And they are going to fall back on that training. It's just you start standing, and when someone doesn't care about what happens to you, we build a lot of trust with our jiu-jitsu partners, and you are used to people reacting the way jiu-jitsu people do. I still do people's first rolls.
Sometimes I do.
Sometimes you do, yes, if they're big now. I'm getting older. But when people make it out of the beginner program, their first rolls are with a coach, which is helpful, but they get all the crazy out on us. And they go a little bit fight or flight a lot of times because it's a little stressful and they don't have the skills to fill that gap. So they'll do kind of crazy stuff. And so we want them to kind of get that out on us. But if you haven't rolled with someone like that in a while, a lot of people, if they're older or they're more advanced, they're like, oh, I'm not going to roll with that person until they learn a little more or get a little more comfortable. You forget what it's like to roll with someone who's not going to be as predictable. Maybe they've been a wrestler, or maybe they've done rugby or football. Like, they kind of know how to stay up and move around. And they, I had one with a dude, and I was in an arm bar, and he stood all the way up, just picked me all the way up off the ground. And I was just hanging at hip height. And I'm like, well, probably should have let go or underhooked the leg. There's definitely ways to not have that happen. And you just forget until you And he's like, oh, I wasn't going to slam you. And because we had talked about it, you're not allowed to do that. He's just like, I didn't know what to do. So I stood all the way up, and I was just like, okay, well, please don't do that again. But here's, you forget that it's possible. So I would say if you're a hobbyist, roll with those fresh white belts once in a while. Get a little wild in your rolls. Not to the point where maybe someone's way bigger than you and you're dealing with that, but you'll remember what it's like to be in a little less controlled situation. They're not going to be using a whole lot of technique when they first start.
I think it's a more honest look.
Mm-hmm. In some ways, yeah.
I also, Michael and I have talked about this, I think. I wonder, to most people, violence is like abhorrent. Most people, the vast majority of people will never be in a physical confrontation in their life, which I think is awesome. And I don't think anybody should be out there seeking it. You could train jiu-jitsu for a really long time, like training an armbar or a kimura. I wonder sometimes how many people would be willing to finish a kimura and actually rotate somebody's shoulder 180 degrees the wrong direction. Knowing how to do so and being willing as a person to hurt somebody else in that manner are two very different things.
Yeah, it is. I think a lot of people, when pressed, if they were faced with that choice, probably would, but I don't know. I mean, I've only done it by accident, I'll be honest, and then I can remember sweet Stella, Travis's daughter, she was on the national judo team, and she had a competition where she had the girl's arm and the ref didn't stop it. And the girl didn't tap, so she just kept going. She broke her arm.
That's a controlled environment between two competitors. I'm talking about somebody who is out in their daily life, and for whatever reason, they do end up in an altercation with somebody.
Well, still, I mean, she went and threw up in a trash can. She's like, it's still gnarly. Yes. And she could have let go to win. She chose to keep going, which is what she should have done to be in that competitive environment. But it's still a choice. You can feel, if you're advanced, when their arm is at that point, and she could have let go. She kept going. So, I think sometimes I've had friends that have been in a competitive environment, and again, if the person doesn't tap and they're an adult, the ref usually lets it go. So,
as they should, in my mind. If you're a competitor in there and you're unwilling to tap and you want to melt your elbow a little bit and deal with that rehab, okay.
Yeah, it's a choice.
It's a choice in a competitive and controlled environment where you're still fighting inside of a rule set. In my experience in real world violence, where all of a sudden a lot of other things are on the table.
Yeah.
Almost everybody actually avoids hurting somebody else, which I think is a good thing. Yeah.
Huh. That's interesting. I wouldn't have thought that.
It is an emotional, in my experience, an emotional hurdle that you have to work your way across. And there's obviously the different levels of hurting people, all the way to the end of hurting them to the point where nobody will ever hurt them anymore.
Sure.
So it's those aren't without consequence. And there's a lot of people who will reach the edge of that abyss and they don't want to go any farther. And I think that's okay.
Yeah.
But I worry sometimes that people are a little bit lying to themselves.
Well, I think if I ever had to use it in a self-defense situation, I'd be trying to choke the person unconscious, because you can still run around with a broken arm or a broken shoulder. And that person's still going to be hard to deal with. So I'd be looking to put the person out. Then you at least have a little time to run away.
Yeah, I agree with you. So what do you focus in your jiu-jitsu on now?
So I'm coaching a lot more than I'm competing now. I still compete at the master's level just to kind of push myself a little bit. And that's such a fun thing, honestly, that for all the criticisms for IBJJF, the fact that they have created a place for older athletes to kind of throw down is really fun.
Older. Where does Masters 1 start? Like
Masters
21 years old?
No, it's 30. It's 30. But I mean, it goes all the way up. So it's every 5 years of age, every 10 pounds. So you can find someone, maybe you're a 45-year-old blue belt. You can find a guy or a girl that's that age and your weight in Vegas that wants to have that match. And that's really cool. At some of the opens, it can be a little harder, but at Worlds, there were 20,000 people there this year. Sport's getting bigger. So you could go and have those matches. And it wouldn't be a huge division, especially for women. For the guys, they're huge. It is crazy how many guys sign up for that. So it's really neat, actually. So you can see how it goes.
Yeah.
Which is really fun. And and you can accrue points, and there's, rankings for each of those and everything. So it's just, I don't know, it's provided a way to kind of keep pushing yourself, which I think is neat.
What percentage of jiu-jitsu participants do you think are women?
Oh, I think at a healthy gym, you're going to see 25 to 30%. I hope someday it's 50. It should reflect the outside population. In a competitive standpoint, I would say it's more like 10. I think there's less that want to compete for sure. I mean, only, what did Pete say at Origin Camp? He said like 3 to 5% of people like really compete, do it, like I was talking about where you're doing it every other month or whatever. And there just aren't that many women in general. So it's even a smaller number of those women that want to compete.
What do you think is the biggest barrier for women to either start jiu-jitsu or stick with it?
To start, it's the only sport that I'm aware of where there isn't a men's team and a women's team. If you play men's soccer, you typically don't have women on your team, or rugby, or basketball, or
I can't think of a
whatever
sport
else it is. They don't mix the genders. But because, it started out mainly for men, now you're sparring in these mixed open mats. So normally you're not getting that close to a man that's outside your family, ever. So there's a big barrier there. A lot of women have trauma in their past too. It's about 1 in every 5 in the US. And now you're putting yourself in a situation where you might get pinned down by a dude that you don't know. And you can tap, but if the person hasn't done the work to go through therapy, you're re-traumatizing yourself, So there's that as a barrier. Just again, the closeness, the idea that you're going to be that close to a guy that's, someone that you don't know, can be really uncomfortable. It breaks down a lot of social and physical barriers that are normally there. And it becomes so commonplace when you're in a jiu-jitsu gym. We don't even think about it anymore. It's totally normal. You occasionally get people, women and men, that they don't have good boundaries anyway. And then you put them in an environment where the boundaries are a little bit mushy because of the sport, and they take advantage of that. And that can be a really bad situation. I've seen guys and girls that have kind of made that really uncomfortable for everyone involved, taking it out of the sport context.
Yeah.
So I think that's the biggest thing, just the physical and social barriers that you're breaking. And then the next one is, okay, so you want to do jiu-jitsu and you're female, you're expected to perform against men who are all stronger, faster, often heavier, but not always.
I've heard size and strength don't matter.
Yeah. I wish that was true. Don't you, Michael?
Yeah.
First off, actually, I know who says that. Big people.
Yeah, huge people.
Yeah, size and strength doesn't matter. Oh, really?
The Matt Thorntons of the world.
Or the Gus's.
Yeah, Gus. Yeah, I wish that was true, but so they are learning everything, and they're technically maybe as proficient as their male counterparts, but because they're a little bit slower, a little bit not as strong, they have to be better. Their timing has to be better, and their positioning has to be better to pull something off. So they'll be doing it right, and it's just not working. So you kind of have to be better if you're expected to perform against male counterparts, even your weight, at a live level, at an open mat, where people aren't letting you do things. And we always try to, when we're trying to evaluate belts, we're looking at, okay, if you met your body double in the street, like another female that was a blue belt that was your size, like what would that look like? But you need to have pretty good defense and still good positional skills against a male, And so I've talked to some of my ladies about that. We have some that are right on the verge of blue belt, and I'm kind of almost holding them to a higher standard than I would the men, because they are going to get put on their back. And I don't want the first thing to happen as they get their guard passed, or they're standing, and I don't want them to get swept as the first thing that happens in the match, because it's really hard to recover when you're smaller and you're newer. So you need to be a little better positionally right off the bat.
What can be done to reduce or remove, to the best of the ability, the 3 barriers that you listed?
Well, I would say having a really good gym culture, and that starts from the top down, that the instructor is looking out for the open mat culture. So are people treating each other well? Are they offering opportunities for people who are newer or smaller or not as athletic to work or are they just using everyone as a training dummy? So if you have a room full of competitors that are just training for themselves, you'll end up weeding out the people who are maybe there because they need to get stronger, because they want to learn self-defense, or because they, have trauma in their past. You'll lose all those people. So there has to be kind of a range. And so making sure that if your bigger guys on the mat, I'm really a stickler about this, they're starting on their back and they're working on their guard if they're going with smaller people. And of course, that smaller person is probably going to end up on their back anyway. They're probably going to get it swept or taken down, but at least they have the opportunity to work some passing or try to get on top before that happens. So then both people are getting better. So, training your bigger, stronger, faster people to be good partners, I think, is a really good one. Being welcoming to women on the mat. So, letting them know that there's a place for them. I think having a women's class goes a long way in doing that. You can do short little intro programs just for women. We have at most of our gyms at least one standalone class throughout the week. Some of the gyms now have twice a week that is just a ladies class. And you really get to see their jiu-jitsu a little more because the size and strength is very equal. When you see a well-matched white belt match, it's back and forth. Like, you don't know who's going to stay on top. It's like jiu-jitsu spaghetti. No one can hold position. Everyone can't finish submissions, and so you're really getting to see a little more of what they're capable of. When you see a guy and a girl, even if they're the same size, the guy will get on top and they're just like pancaked, and it's like they're lucky if they can get out again. There's just, again, a size and strength difference, and you don't get to see like that woman's jiu-jitsu necessarily, so it's kind of a little hard to evaluate. So if you can get them in a women's class, you can see a little better. And sometimes the women are harder on each other. Like, they don't give each other any quarter. There's not the size and strength difference, but they'll go for it. I have a couple ladies, especially. I have a few moms actually they're super hard on each other. they roll hard.
So I wonder if they like throw Stanley cups at each other out in the parking lot.
Maybe, yeah.
Talk some savage shit.
Yeah.
You fucking going to open mat today? Let's go.
Yeah. So when the women that are on the sidelines, whether they're moms, girlfriends, wives, they're watching and they see these other women that look like them on the mat, like, okay, there's a place for me, which was my question when I came in. Is there a place for me here? And there's yeah, there can be. So it's having a good culture. How are you treating the newer, smaller, weaker people that are coming in? How are you treating the women? Are they being treated well? How are you treating beginners? If I go into a gym and they're treating beginners like they're training dummies or they're not important, gyms are built on white belts. That's going to be the majority of your population all the time. And then it goes into that small end of the funnel. So if you're not treating your newer students well, your school is never going to be very big, and you exclude people from jiu-jitsu that probably really need it. So it was just kind of the flip mentality of we had at the beginning, where we were just going hard all the time.
I just don't think they were treating it like a business back then. I think, maybe you could make the argument that the art, if you will, was a little bit more pure, but I think the more people that you get into it by treating it like a business, I think you can still maintain a lot of that purity, whatever that means to people. But yeah, if you want to pay your light bill and the heating bill and stuff like that, you might want to also consider the business perspective.
Well, you allow the people access to jiu-jitsu that it's really going to be a huge benefit to them. People who, again, have that past trauma or maybe have been bullied or haven't been very confident or strong in other parts of their life, like, it gives them a way to build that, which is so hard these days, I think.
Unfortunately, it also gives bullies another way to express their bullyism.
It's true. And that's part of a good open mat culture is you
fuck those people up.
No, no. I mean, the mat enforcement is
real,
feels good, but it usually just teaches the person new tricks. You have to have a conversation with them.
What if you do it harder?
Yeah. Again, they just kind of learn how to be meaner to other people. As we've talked about, they don't learn, and a lot of times they can kind of handle that. Sometimes they might leave, but I found it's much better to have a conversation with them, give them some tools to try to fix their jiu-jitsu. And then if they can't do it, honestly, they need to be kicked out because they're going to cost you more students in the long run. They're not helping your community.
You can weaponize predators too.
Yeah, that's of course another scary outcome of what we do.
Yeah. What would you change about jiu-jitsu if you could? Any aspect of it? I mean, how long have you been doing it now too? 14 years?
It's about 15 now this fall. Yeah.
3-stripe black belt. It's not a big deal.
Yeah.
It's actually a huge deal.
It's bizarre because that's what Travis, I don't know. I always thought of Travis that way, I guess. But now he's got another one.
I know. He's got 5 more years to wait, though.
I know. Yep. We're getting old is what it means.
Everybody is getting old, even Michael.
Not really, Michael. He's got a ways
Not really.
to go.
I got a little bit before I'm old.
Yeah.
I said we're all getting older. The calendar day flips over for us all.
Yeah.
What would you change, though, in 15 years of doing this? And the answer maybe be nothing. But even from a competitive or a training, if you could change something that is maybe a little bit more historical or dogmatic in the sport or activity, can you think of anything you would change?
I think it's what I have worked so hard to change, and that's just having a ladies community within each gym. So every gym I've been to and every gym I stayed at and trained at, I would try to encourage whatever female that I ran into there. I kind of wrote a blueprint on how to start a women's program. Like, here's how you do it. And once you get about 10 at your gym, they'll start to recruit more. But the social support really helps keep the women in that community. It changes the culture on the mat. It really does. People are just a little more careful. Honestly, the gym has to be cleaner. You're going to have more kids in the gym. Husbands and boyfriends are going to train longer because their girlfriends are involved. It's not something that takes them away from home. It's something that they can do together as a family. So it'll elevate the gym, I think, in a really positive way. And it offers those women, again, a place where they can kind of see their jiu-jitsu a little more. They're with people who are having those same problems in terms of speed and strength on the mat, so they realize they're not alone in that struggle. And they see women who are further down the path, and they see it's possible. We have now 3 female black belts in our community, myself, Kisa, who's Travis's wife, and Stella. And Kisa and Stella are very small. I'm a bigger person. I was an athlete, but they're both very athletic, but they're, around 125, 130 pounds. So for the other women to see them, and Kisa started later in life, they say it's possible, so those excuses they were making for themselves, or, when you have a harder day thinking about not coming back, they're like, you can do it if you keep showing up, So I that is my mark that I hope to leave, and again, I have that blueprint. I have a little video that goes along with the curriculum, but it just talks about how do you build that little community. You don't have to have a female instructor. It can be the right male instructor. And eventually you would want it to be a female, but at first you may not have that person in place. And there needs to be a technical leader and a social leader within that group. And again, it can just really take on a life of its own, and it'll preserve that community within your gym, and the benefits will spread out. Like, I think it's just a positive all around. And, I would want women to walk into the gym and see someone like them on the mat. That would be really cool. A lot of gyms you walk into still, and there are no smaller people, there are no women, there are no older people on the mat. It's not a cross section of the community. It's the strongest people in the group. And that was like the gym when I started with Travis. There's a reason that so many of us made it to black belt. We were going to make it wherever. We were going to learn it in a barn, in a rec center, and wherever we encountered that, we were going to figure it out. At one point I was learning from like DVDs up in Alaska. and those people can still be in your gym, but we want to spread it out to all the other ones too. Not that top 10% or 5% that are going to compete, but the ones that maybe have struggled elsewhere. And for kids too, that I have a lot of kids in my program that a team sport, a school sport, is not ever going to be a good fit for them. Just personality wise, or, maybe they've been bullied a bunch, and it just affords an opportunity for that to happen more when they're in a sport after school. And it provides them a place where they can start to build some confidence. They can start to build some fighting skills. They carry themselves differently. I have some pictures of kids over the years. Same kid, they look completely different 3 or 4 years later. Like, they're just standing up straighter. They're looking you directly in the eyes. It's cool.
Yeah. If you were able to do jiu-jitsu for another 15 years, what would you have wanted in that time? Like, if you could arrive at that, what would you have wanted to accomplish in that time period?
I would want to empower women at gyms all over the world and just teach, I do these little self-defense programs every year here, just teach all the women that I know to fight, and not necessarily fight with their hands, but think of themselves as a fighter, not as a victim, but as a warrior, as someone who has control over their environment, over their life, and things don't just happen to them, that they make things happen. And that is the kind of sense that I'd like to leave the women that I encounter.
Are you enjoying the traveling seminars that you were able to do this last year?
Yes.
Because we got some good trips in.
Yeah. I mean, the ones I've gone to, they're dear friends, that I'm teaching at their academy, so it's an honor. And
some of them were unknown, like Ireland.
Yeah, that's true. That was more of a destination seminar, but the people who came were, kind of
the core group that traveled with.
Yeah, people.
We have our Montana, Chicago component. It's not a big deal.
People who knew my teaching, so they were willing to travel to train together, But
I mean, you hit where were we with Dedeco? I'll call it South Boston, and then Alexei was north of Boston by a lot. I can't. It was up in Maine.
Some good New England geography here.
Yeah, it's fine. I'm really good with my geography. Mm-hmm. Taught at Origin Camp for the last 3 years. Mm-hmm. Ireland, you're going back. You've gone to Woodstock a few times, going back again for this ridiculous, unsatiable desire to see the fucking groundhog, which is like, the thought of that is worse than torture to me, actually, but I will.
It's where Groundhog Day was filmed with Bill Murray, Woodstock, Illinois.
Awesome. Who cares?
It's going to be great. His name is Woodstock Willie.
Yeah, and they're probably on the 8th Woodstock Willie. And they probably change him out every 2 years because I'm sure a car runs over him from time to time. They're like, here he is again.
I have a feeling they treat him better than that.
I'm sure
he makes
they do.
appearances other times in the year, too.
I'm sure. And I'm sure that when Woodstock Willie reaches a fine old age of whatever groundhogs get to, they swap him out with one that looks the same and don't tell anybody.
Maybe that's true.
Yeah. But is that your favorite thing that you're doing, though, is those traveling seminars now?
I don't think it's, I love being able to teach my own classes here where I've had some kids now for 6 or 7 years. I've seen them go from a 6-year-old to, a teenager. And so I really enjoy that process. When I was teaching high school or environmental education, I had a really short time with those students. So you wonder if you're really affecting them very much. And in jiu-jitsu, I mean, most of the time the kids want to be there. I have a few that are being forced onto that path by parents, but for the most part, they want to be there, and you see these really cool changes. You get to see them grow up. So I enjoy that. And then some of my adult students, again, just seeing the change in their personality, their priorities. You see people make really big life changes and become a better version of themselves in a lot of ways. Not all of them, obviously, but some of them, you get to see some really cool transformation. And that requires time and effort on your part as a coach, so that I value that very highly, being able to teach at my own academy here. And it's Travis's school, but I've been coaching here for a while.
I would say you're definitely an anchor there in the kids program and the evening classes. Mm-hmm. Yeah, those people are lucky to have you.
Oh, thank you, sweetie.
I mean, I'm not here for the Code Browns. I mean, that's a situation that I dealt with that with my own children. Code Brown, obviously, being somebody shitting their pants.
It's a rare but possible
but the journey
outcome in children's class. Yeah.
But the journey of discovery that the coaches have to go on. First, they have to identify that there was a Code Brown. Then they have to put on their detective hat and hopefully determine who actually executed said Code Brown, because there's not going to, in my experience with kids, they're not going to be like, I shit my pants. No, you got to let's look around. Because the stories you've told me, it's like people are just trampling all over it.
It's a real rarity. That's why I've told you about it. It's an anomaly. It's not like a normal occurrence in children's class. But
I think it is.
No, it's pretty rare. And we start kids as young as 3 and 4.
Listen, as somebody who's recently shit their pants quite a bit, I can't actually talk about children doing so. I get it. It wasn't my choice. It wasn't awesome. But it was what it was.
Yeah. It's not always theirs either.
I guess. The difference being I was able to take care of myself. You have to take care of somebody else's shitty kid.
Well, yeah, hopefully their parents are there in that case. That's unfortunately, Travis teaches the youngest class still. And so I think that's
Why
more
do you
something.
think he loves that class so much?
So it's actually one of the hardest classes to teach.
That's why I'm asking. So Travis is like you've already mentioned, he is the head coach at the gym. He's he's like the number 2 guy at SBG, Straight Blast Gym International.
Yep.
He teaches the midday classes in Whitefish and Kalispell, which is adults. And there's an open mat afterward. It's an hour class, an hour open mat. Arguably, there are some children in that class from an emotional perspective. And I'm talking about myself, of course. Michael's in there too. He's emotionally and physically a child. But to go teach 4 and 5-year-olds, holy shit, that couldn't be more different.
Well, they're 3 and 4-year-olds. Yeah, they're
First
not.
off, why? Right? Why?
They can actually do a lot.
No, they
at that
can't.
age.
No, they can't.
They can
No,
more
they
than
can't.
you'd think.
I have 3 of them.
You'd be amazed at what he actually can get out of that class. Like,
Why do you
they're
think he
pretty
likes
good.
it so much, though?
Well, he likes it. I think he does like teaching kids. He teaches a lot of the advanced kids classes, our leadership teams and competition teams. So he teaches those. He's taught all the age groups, but it's actually a very challenging class to teach. Like, you can lose control of that class.
Oh, yes.
Unlike some of the other ones where the kids have they've been to school and they have sort of a social structure. For a lot of the 3 and 4-year-olds, that might be their first organized activity. So it can get kind of Lord of the Flies. So you have to have a really experienced instructor handle that class. You wouldn't think so. You'd be like, oh, anyone can do a 3 and 4-year-old class. To both keep control of the class and teach them some jiu-jitsu, like, you really have to be pretty experienced. So he has some apprentice coaches in there, but I don't think he's found quite the right one to handle that particular class.
I don't know that if you stacked $100 bills the height of this TV on this table, that I would actually take it to teach children of that age. I would lose my shit.
It's actually pretty fun. I taught that class for a few years, and I enjoyed it a lot more than I thought I was going to.
Really?
Yeah.
All right.
You're seeing them become people. I mean, they're learning how to socialize. They're learning how to use their body. We do a lot of body awareness in there and just strength building and cooperative games. They're learning to think of, we're trying to start teaching them some empathy, not just I, me, my,
All right. More power to you.
Yeah.
Anybody willing to teach children, especially other people's children, I mean, you deserve a sainthood. I know how bad my own, how bad my own kids can be in their teenage years, which is actually a different journey of discovery, because I don't know. I try to be honest about my parenting, or the lack thereof, the times that I was gone, and people are like, oh, I can't wait until my kids are older. It's going to be so much more exciting and fun. It's like, sit down for a second. There's just as many problems. They're way more complex, like pregnancy and alcohol and drugs and driving, and all 3 of those in combination in the same social setting. And I don't know, maybe code browns are a little easier to deal with.
I guess in some ways, at least it's a more simple solution.
I guess. What else are you passionate about? What else do you want to accomplish? I mean, you've done a lot in the jiu-jitsu world. I hope we have a lot of life ahead of us. I hope I don't have to be a tummy ache survivor for a second time.
Oh, man. Let's not do that again. Yeah.
I wasn't looking to do it the first time.
Yeah.
So
You did roll that day, too. Just got some jiu-jitsu matches in
I rolled
before
for
I
about
went
an
to the
hour.
hospital.
Yeah. I thought it was a tummy ache. I think you've heard me say this. I thought it was a gas bubble.
Yeah.
I remember the exact moment that I felt a change in my stomach. It was while you were teaching, and I was sitting down with Mike, and we were recording that podcast, and I took a sip of a Black Rifle coffee ready to drink. Mm-hmm. And when I swallowed it, I felt a little bit of a shift in my stomach, and I remember thinking in my head, oh man, that's like probably dinner from last night or something. I thought it was just moving along. Mm-hmm. And then, I put my gi on because I told you I was going to be your uki. And I'm like, I don't know if this feels good. I can't really stand up straight. And then people are like, hey, do you want to roll? And I said, of course I'm going to roll.
Yeah, the other instructor, Greg, was my demonstration partner because he wasn't feeling good. And then I looked over and he was rolling, and I'm like, well, guess he's okay. And then, we started leaving, and it was just getting worse and worse. Tried to give him some medication. He was driving still, of course, which my dad, I have a story of him driving to the hospital, and he's in Mississippi, and he drove to Vicksburg, and they said, your blood work is so far off that you need to go to ICU in Jackson, which is an hour away. And he got in the car and drove, and
That's what I'm talking about.
my
Good shit.
stepmother was in there with him. So he had another driver, but he just drove himself there and then spent a week in the ICU
That's what I'm talking
getting
about.
his potassium back under control. And this was similar. So he's driving, and
Well, you tricked me.
I said, at least let me drive. And he's like, no, I'm driving. We're going to go to Salt Lake, and we were going to go all the way to Idaho Falls. We were lucky we were driving and not flying. And I said, well, just let me drive. And so he switched seats with me and I just drove to the hospital. He's like, where are we going? I'm like, we're going to the hospital. And I was like, if it's nothing, we'll get back in the car and keep driving. If it's something, then we need to figure it out. But that was an involuntary trip to the hospital. Ended up being very necessary, but he's like, what are they going to do? I just have a tummy ache. What, I'm going to the hospital for a tummy ache?
That is legitimately what I thought in the moment. That about 4 hours after I drank that fluid of death, I think was the highest level of consistent pain that I've ever been in.
The fluid of death being the medication they tried to give him. They tried to give him medication that.
Oh, they didn't. I drank
clear
about
it.
8/10 of that.
Yeah. Yep, which works.
The red fluid of death.
80% of the time, and it just didn't work with your
Yeah.
situation at a hernia. So it was an internal hernia, so it got hung up and had to go into emergency surgery. What are they going to do for just my tummy ache? It was-
Precisely.
yeah. It's like, yeah, they admitted him. He barely could walk into the hospital, and they admitted him almost immediately. They did a CT scan, and they're like, you have to stay here. We're going to have to figure this out. So we were actually lucky. We were fortunate we were driving and not flying, and that we were near hospitals because we've had some remote trips. You've had some remote trips the last
I've
few
thought a
months.
lot about, what if that had happened in Costa Rica?
Yeah.
I also thought about a year ago, kind of right now. Actually, a year ago today, we were jumping over the pyramids in Egypt.
Yeah.
And I only know these things because Jericho is really good at posting shit that pops up in his feed. I'm like, oh, that felt like 10 years ago. But what if that had happened in Antarctica?
Yeah.
I actually don't know what they would have done.
I
in
have a
that
feeling they
situation.
have some medical facilities there. They
think they
seem
would've-
pretty well equipped.
They would have, I think, flown me to the research station at the South Pole because I think they have a higher level of care there, or at least access to get to a higher level of care from there quicker.
We'd been hunting in the backcountry. I mean, there'd been some places where it would really have not been good. So we were lucky.
We were lucky, but I'm sorry that we had to go through that. I'm sorry I put you through that. It probably wasn't the easiest thing to watch.
Well, you don't have to apologize for a medical emergency. It happens. Believe me, you weren't having a good time either. I know.
That was the most profuse amount of sweat I've ever had happen while physically doing nothing.
Yeah, it was awful. It was awful. And the nurse was saying she administered that medication, 7 or 8 times a week. So this is something that's actually really common. So if, you're having pain and it's not going away,
Fucking deal with it.
yeah, just drive yourself to the hospital. No.
Yeah, or don't go.
Yeah, totally. This is why men who are married live longer.
I'm not sure that's true.
Maybe not.
Michael,
In your
will
case,
you
it
look
is.
that up?
In your case, it
I
is.
will
Yeah.
actually.
In my case, yes, there have been many people that messaged me and said, thank you for marrying a woman that is smarter than you so we can continue to enjoy you being an idiot on the internet.
Yeah.
Which I don't know
No,
what to
he
say.
was adamant that we weren't going. And
I did not think it was something that required a hospital stay. I'm not a doctor.
Yeah.
I'm used to, I would say I have a okay pain threshold. It wasn't the most pain I had ever been in at that point. It got to that point. I wonder what point it would have gotten to if it wasn't for that fucking red. And again, the medicine was actually clear. It was the cranberry juice that was red. I wonder what it would have gotten to, though, if I hadn't drank that.
You were not good in the waiting room.
Yeah, but it wasn't as bad as it was after that sauce, the special sauce. I don't know. I'm sure they were trying to escalate through the least intrusive.
Yeah, they
form
gave
of
him a
care.
medication that was meant to clear the blockage, but it causes contraction of your digestive system, which, if you can't clear it, is just super painful. So
Yeah,
it was
and then you
gnarly.
try ketamine and you hear the hairs inside of your ear clapping, and your wife laughs at you because you're like, "Why is it so loud in here?"
It was not loud. Yeah, I was like, well, you're in it now.
I did not enjoy that shit at all.
No.
What else? I mean, what else are what would you hope for our life together? What are you looking forward for the most in the future?
Well, I've loved traveling. You know, we've gotten to do a lot of really amazing trips. Hoping to go to Baldface this year, both of us. You weren't able to go last year,
I was not.
do some snowboarding. I love surfing. I know that you do not, but or like the ocean anymore. But
It's not that I don't like surfing. I don't like forced participation in water sports.
Okay, so maybe some voluntary participation in some future dive or surf trips. That's been awesome.
I have gone diving with you many times.
I know.
You put me on a fucking boat in Costa Rica where the water was splashing over the bow and just hitting me in the face. And I'm like, this is not something that I should have to be paying to do for the rest of my life.
I looked over at him in his straw, big tourist hat, you know, one of those big kind of cowboy-looking ones, the tropical ones with the strap, and he had his sunglasses on. He was just getting blasted in the face every time we hit a wave, and I was like, oh, no, we're never doing this again.
What'd you find, Michael? Marriage statistics?
2 years longer
Are you serious?
on average. Yeah.
Does it say why?
It doesn't say exactly why, but the
My actual
see.
suspicion is that isolation is one of the worst things for human beings, and I think COVID probably highlighted that. I think you would live longer with somebody just from a quality of life perspective.
I think there's a piece of that. I think for men, it's also forced hospital trips.
yeah, this says it's less risk to take, or less likely to take risky decisions or make risky decisions.
Not true at all. Again, there's edge cases to everything.
So there's that.
I used to go wingsuit base jumping over the top of my kids. Like, there's a...
What could go wrong?
I mean, a few things, but you got to manage the risk.
Yeah.
I'm willing to take risks. I'm not willing to gamble.
Right.
That is one hard and fast rule. And I actually, when things get to a point where I feel like they are being too risky, I get very edgy with it. And sometimes I will say things that others don't appreciate.
Yeah. I guess just having all the information, and if it's medical, you might have to go in to get that information.
True, but I think we should restrict your ability to access WebMD.
Yeah. Well,
She was researching
I may
like
have overblown it a little.
cancerous lumps in people's stomachs and shit.
That's a common reason for a blockage. That was one of the first questions I asked him, and he said no, and he's like, that's a legitimate question, you know?
It is wild to me that while I was out, they had my entire intestinal volume out, and the doctor was working his way through it with his fingers, and then they just put it all back in, and it's okay.
Yep, and zipped it back up. It's amazing, actually, and it was actually incredible how quickly you've recovered from that big incision, too. I mean, they did a good job. That was at American Fork Hospital.
Yep, back on the mats on Monday.
No, we're not there yet, yeah.
Doctor said, listen to your body.
Yeah. What else do we want to do? Hunting, I've really enjoyed learning to hunt, getting better at that. I went out with Vaughn this year, and that was our first kind of solo, you know, without someone kind of
More success than Michael and I in Denver and Nelson had.
pointing out all the animals. Yeah, that's true.
Since we saw nothing, I was regaling them with tales of your guys.
We saw a bull moose
Yeah.
before we saw.
Which you
Oh,
didn't
you
have
weren't
a
there that
tag
day. We
for,
saw another
yeah.
one.
Oh, did you?
Yeah.
Which is kind of cool, but you didn't have a
is cool.
tag for it. So
I don't think there was actually moose tags for the districts that they were in.
yeah.
That one, it was absolutely out of fucks to give because he sat there as the sunrise, clearly skylined, and then stood up and stood there for 10 minutes as if he was no care in the world. Like he'd never been threatened by anything. I don't even think you can hunt him there.
Yeah. I would like to work more on archery this year. I think that would be really cool to get to a point where I could archery hunt. I'm not confident enough yet.
We
Put
need to
some
get
time in.
Mr. Dudley out for that. I just don't have the knowledge when it comes to archery. I can do the basics, but I'm actually not even that current anymore when it comes to archery. It just, every year, God, we had this happen to us the last 2 years where the fall comes, we're like, okay, we're not going to do that much. And then the next thing you know, you look at the calendar, like we have 3 days off for the next 90 days.
Yeah, the fall this year, it kind of I think a lot of the jiu-jitsu seminars are going to be later in the spring and kind of winter. So it was the seminars going together with the hunting season kind of made it really busy. So hopefully next year we can just maybe focus a little more on hunting and get some time in. I had some tendonitis actually I wasn't able to really shoot until that cleared up. So got to get it in when you can, I guess. You never know.
How have you liked, I guess, the forced teenager living with you all of a sudden?
Instant stepchildren.
I was going to say, it was a situation where, I mean, obviously you knew what you were getting into, but I mean, I guess the concept of that and the reality of that are a little different.
Yeah, no, it's been really cool getting to know them, and we got to go on that trip recently where they all came to Costa Rica and got to spend a lot more time with them, and it was awesome.
Did you have
more than I hoped for?
It was more than I hoped for too. It was some of the best time that I think I've ever actually spent with them in general, and that might just be as they're getting older, we can connect at a different level.
Yeah.
You know, did you have any hesitation marrying me, knowing that I had kids, or being with me, knowing that I had kids?
It was a thought. You know, I grew up in a step family that was really challenging. We got kind of squished together without a lot of groundwork, I guess. So I was a little worried about that part, but they were pretty flexible.
In some places, and in some ways. My children are very non-flexible in others. One of them reported that you beat him at chess for the first time, Michael.
And 2 times last night online.
Oh,
wow.
He actually did not tell us that.
Yeah.
It's a knife.
He did tell us that, and he thought you were cheating.
Oh, that's right. He did say that he
Really?
thought that you were looking up the moves on the computer.
I was not.
It's a knife that cuts Tyler deep.
I can tell.
He's like, I prefer a
I prefer
three-dimensional-
face-to-face where he can't use the internet to research his moves.
I prefer a 3-dimensional board. I'm like, it's because you lost, isn't it?
He hung sacrificed his queen with no defense. You guys don't know what I'm talking about.
I know
but
what
he
you're
made
talking
a
about.
really stupid move.
I've said this before with what specifically what Tyler is. He is a walking Dunning-Kruger curve in everything that he does.
No, he's not.
The fuck he's not. He self-advises himself on college curriculum, occupation, starting businesses, how much he should train jiu-jitsu. He threw by me the other day. He's like, I recommend for myself a 65% carbohydrate diet. He's taking iron supplements until Leah told him one of the main byproducts of that could be constipation. He researches and takes supplements that he hears on Joe Rogan's podcast. The fucking kid is out of his mind.
He's pretty focused for an 18-year-old.
But
think of yourself at 18.
Yeah, I was already in the SEAL teams.
Okay, you're at the other end of the Dunning-Kruger curve, I guess. You're not a great example.
No, but for Tyler, his experience level at almost everything is low, but his thoughts about his capabilities.
He's willing to listen and seek a higher level of understanding from other people.
He's willing to listen about certain things. I swear to God, the pile of laundry in front I think that he strips naked to shit. Because the pile of laundry in front of his toilet is legendary. And then when he does do his laundry, I'm wondering if the water actually permeates through all the clothing that he stuffs it so thick, let alone the chapstick or earbuds or whatever else might be in there.
I feel like that's a component of most teenage laundry.
Yeah. I appreciate the fact that he does it.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, I still have slowly been taking his socks too.
I could imagine that being a war between you for a long time.
I tried to take a pair of his boxers and I put it on and I almost blasted the seams out because I was going to go and make breakfast only wearing those and just wait because he likes the Pair of Thieves boxers. But I just couldn't do it. It was like cutting off circulation.
Tiny.
Yeah. It has been really cool living with him for the last 2 years. I never thought that we would get to that place.
Yeah.
I've always talked
It's not easy.
It's not. And I've always talked really broadly about, people know that I was married before, but a lot of the impact of that and the impact on the kids, I spend a lot of time thinking about how thankful I am at the place that we are at now.
Me too.
So what else do you want to accomplish? Where else should we go that we haven't gone?
Well,
What should we do?
you know, it is still my hope to create a women's gi company that would have separates. Just because...
Separates mean you can order a top and bottom individually?
Yes.
Okay.
Just like a bathing suit or like most other types of clothing. Right now, it's pretty much you have to get one size, and a lot of women are a different size on top as they are on the bottom. And I don't think anyone's quite nailed the pants yet either. So we have a lady that is sewing a sample locally, and I haven't given up on the idea of having a company where we could accommodate that, even if it's just pre-order, you know.
Well, I don't think there's anything stopping you from doing that. Mm-hmm. I mean, obviously the concept of doing that, and then we both know Pete from Origin. What did he say his first pair of gi pants cost him? It was like $800. The production cost, because reinventing the process, sourcing, and I think he made like 3 pair.
Yeah. And he was, I mean, of course, he was making them in the U.S., which is a whole, I mean, we have looked into it, and it's so challenging. I mean, what he did was, I mean, he had to build it from the ground up, talk about vertical integration.
Talk about also, and he'll tell you, I think he's the one that I stole the tuition payments thing from, because I'm pretty sure he talks about all of those things in terms of tuition payments, whether it was the building being too small, making the classic retail error, which I have done, of I know how many of these I should make because people are going to love these. We're going to go big. Then you realize,
So many, yeah.
oh shit, I just created something that only I like. You know,
yeah.
It's a common problem in the retail world.
It's an easy trap. Yeah.
It is.
And maybe I'm doing that with the gis. I don't know. I mean, I have heard from, I don't know many women that have a uniform that they feel like really fits them. So it's something that, it's a passion, I guess.
Pete would agree with you on that and then would follow up and say, we got to focus on the other stuff first. I think he recognizes that there is that issue, and I don't think their company is necessarily tooled, and I don't mean physically doesn't have the tools. I mean, they're oriented in probably still a growth perspective.
It's a niche within a niche. Jiu-jitsu is a niche
Oh, for
sport.
sure.
And then, as I said, the women, you know, the women that actually do that are an even smaller component. So it's a very small group of people, but they're dedicated. And I think some people, you know, there's still times where I'm wearing 3 gis a day, you know,
Yeah.
between teaching and training.
If you build something cool like that, I think the women would rally around it.
There's
But-
some people starting to try. I don't think anyone's nailed it yet, but they're at least thinking about it, which I think is a good thing. And it means that the sport has evolved. Every competition I go to, there's more women, and it's awesome.
Yeah, I think that's amazing, especially when it started off. I've heard you talk about before I think what did I weigh when I started jiu-jitsu? Probably similar to what I do now. Call it somewhere between 205 to 215 pounds. For anybody out there who says it's not easier for bigger people, you can just fuck right off. Like, it is 100% easier for bigger people, especially guys who are stronger. I've heard you telling people before about your first few years where you're like just staring at the ceiling because of the mismatch. That's a tough cookie to crack day after day after day after day after day.
It is what causes some women to quit that or, you know, and this is just newer people in general. If they get an injury, you know, it has to be, they have to feel like it's worth it to rehab that and come back. So
You don't need to rehab when you have tape.
I mean,
My finger is ready.
yeah, so much
I'll
better.
just tape it to that one and we'll be good. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Where else would you like to go bucket list wise traveling? We've already talked about Japan at some point to
That's
snowboard.
definitely on there, yeah, to snowboard for sure. I think someplace like Bali to be able to surf.
Let me know how that trip goes.
Or just some place, I don't know. I want to find some places that just have, I can only surf on a longboard and I am not good at it. So I need kind of smaller waves that are in a more forgiving spot. So
I don't know if Bali would be the spot for that.
I think there's some, I don't know. I've seen pictures and videos and there are places where you can just longboard, you know?
Yeah.
So maybe some place like that. I mean, I've been to some places in Hawaii that are like that. So maybe just doing some trips for surf and do jiu-jitsu. That would be like
Anything else you want to
bucket list.
accomplish?
Accomplishment wise, like I said, the company, I want to continue. I've started doing some YouTube and Instagram, like actually putting some technique out. I've told the story. I think I've told you this, but there was an instructor that passed away kind of suddenly recently, but he had a ton of online content. And so his teaching kind of survives beyond his students and beyond his school, which I think is really cool. And just kind of your idea, your concepts of how things are practiced. It's a little like a fingerprint. It's not going to be exactly like someone else's. So I kind of want to leave a little bit more of that behind. So I'm kind of trying to post more on YouTube, Instagram, and then, you know, we shot a little beginner women's video series that I'm going to put out along with that PDF. So if you want to someone wants to start a women's program at their school, but they're a little lost, they don't know how to do it, it'll give them an idea of how to structure that. And every school has women in it. because people always tell me there are no women in my school. And I said, I guarantee every day there are wives and girlfriends that are dropping off husbands, watching husbands or boyfriends. There are moms that are watching children, and they are probably more consistent than some of your white and blue belts. So they're in there and they're wondering about it, they're thinking about it, but they just need to feel like there's a place and that they're not going to get hurt and that they're not necessarily going to have to be pinned under some dude that they don't know, at least right off the bat. They might want to work into that. They may just end up doing a women's intro program or doing a little bit of self-defense, and makes them more confident, makes them understand what their family's into a little bit more, and maybe they don't go on with it. You know, not all the men that start jiu-jitsu keep with it either.
Yeah, it's true. Michael, any questions for Miss Leah?
No, I didn't come prepared. I didn't know I was asking Leah questions.
I mean, even if I had told you to have some, I know you wouldn't have come prepared anyway. I'm just curious. We've been at it for over 2 hours.
Okay.
So are you going to make me beg you for like another 2 years to come back on again?
No, I don't think so. We could do a Friday episode if people actually had
I think
other
they'll have more
questions.
questions than you might think.
Yeah, maybe.
I think so. Mm-hmm. If they don't, they suck. That's what I think. Well, do you want to so I know you talked about you have the PDF. You have the women's program. Mm-hmm. Where can people go to find that stuff?
CoachLeahBJJ.com. It's probably the easiest place to find all that.
Okay. Mm-hmm. What do you want to close it out with? What do you want people to know?
I don't know. I guess that, to try to find something that makes them a little uncomfortable every day. Something that challenges you, scares you just a little bit. And
what if it scares you a lot? That's what I'm talking about.
Ooh, I don't know. Yeah. It doesn't have to be that far. But for me, jiu-jitsu I got really comfortable there. And I got really comfortable, during the pandemic, not really competing. And I was just kind of cruising in open mat. I've had a couple hard competitive matches the last couple of years where I wasn't winning, so it kind of lit a fire, and I'm like, okay, I got out there, and you can't cruise during the year and hope to win. So it made me realize I have to really kind of dial in my own jiu-jitsu again. And then, getting consistent with lifting. Surfing does scare me. I don't get to do it that often. I'm doing like a dry land.
What scares you about it?
Course. Getting wrecked when I fall.
I mean, don't go to Jaws.
I don't. I was in like waist high beach breaks, but
what was wrecking you?
Sometimes you just fall badly when you're new. You go over the nose of your board, or
it's true.
The board is coming at you because you fell in front of it, or you're about to run over another tourist, or...
Well, here's the thing with that. Just run them over.
Or another instructor, which is even worse. When you're out in Costa Rica. Yeah, usually they do go under, but I can't steer that well yet, so...
You don't need to. You're like a semi-truck up there on that board. Just plow right through crowds.
Don't feel super in control when I'm up there yet, but I am starting to turn into waves, and I'm doing a dry land course to work on my pop-up and my mobility. So I'm, I guess, trying to make that a little bit better. And then the backcountry stuff that we're doing snowboarding this year that terrain is a little scary. We're going up to Baldface, and there's some challenging terrain up there, so I'm going to try to prepare for that.
Just gotta go fast.
Ooh, yeah, you might just end up tomahawking all the way down to the bottom if you do that.
That's usually what I do.
So
I'm not afraid of that.
Yeah, pushing. Just I think it's easy to rest on what you've already done and kind of get, even if you're doing something that's challenging. Like I still have some really hard matches every week. Like there's people here at my own gym that tune me up. So, I'm still pushing myself, but you get comfortable in that, and you got to kind of find some other way.
All right. Well, thank you for finally coming on after multiple years of me begging you to.
Yeah, well, thank you for having me on. Appreciate it.
Thank you for being my person.
I love you.
I love you too.